Ireland stands in a tumultuous balance. The Irish Catholic Front and their French backers have ruled Ireland for nearly 20 years, but growing discontent at the horrific conditions in the nation have given rise to a new wave of Irish nationalism and republicanism. Inspired by the American Revolution, Thomas Costello's Irish Republican Alliance has been growing for some time, first as underground society and soon as a political front. The French had long relied on the Catholic Church to ensure the loyalty of the Irish countryside, and it was a strategy that had worked for some time. But after 20 years of oppression, even the Catholic Church couldn't keep the people of Ireland on the side of the French, and the Irish Catholic Front and their sympathizers gradually began to be seen as collaborators in a new French occupation. The alliance spread from town to town, bolstered by both paramilitaries and local officials. Gradually, a network of resistance spread, headquartered around Cork. In 1785, the Irish Free Army was openly established, and the French turned their attention to clamping down on this new threat. However, the French found out that they were more disconnected with the Irish people than they thought. They possessed essentially no intelligence about the alliance, while the alliance had been systematically infiltrating the lower levels of the Irish bureaucracy. Ireland ground to a halt as the nation was taken over from the inside out. The French were not used to dealing with such a decentralized but coordinated fighting force and tried in vain to fight the alliance as if they were a regular army. The French response was problematic and delayed. Due to their hubris, they believed that none would dare challenge the French Empire, and that a bunch of farmers would easily fall under the boot of the gendarmes. However, this proved a fatal mistake. It wasn't until 1787 where the French truly moved in large amounts of soldiers, and by then, essentially the whole south of the country outside of major cities was controlled by the Alliance or other Republican groups. Thomas Costello was a charismatic, albeit brazen figure. He provided the strong rallying symbol for the resistance but wasn't particularly cunning. The success of the alliance was more than anything due to the web of discontent and local officials backing it. But Costello believed himself solely responsible for all of the alliance's achievements. It can be argued that more than anything, his chief of defense, Richard McKenna, was responsible for the success of the military, that his chief of staff, John Lynch, was responsible for the civilian administration. This situation was further complicated by John Lynch's deep disdain for Richard McKenna, though McKenna was completely unaware of this. Costello, for the time being, however, succeeded in one rule, that being keeping all the forces of republicanism behind him in one coordinated push against the Catholic Front. He met with his commanders in Cork and unveiled his brazen new plan of leading a march on Dublin to defeat the government. He believed the French regime was built on a house of cards, and that all it would take was a push to knock it all over. Richard McKenna informed Costello that they did not have the supplies to do such an attack, and Costello informed him that more than enough supplies were arriving as they spoke. Unbeknownst to all of his closest advisors, Costello had begun secretly dealing with the Prussians, who agreed to send large amounts of guns and material to the alliance. The first secret shipments arrived and gradually poured in as people began to ask questions. It wasn't until the 1789 Dutch crisis was in full swing that the source of the weapons became known. The Prussians increased their shipments tenfold to weaken their new enemies in France. Costello announced that the shipments were from, quote, "my new friends in Berlin." There was an immediate outrage amongst the high command, as the same thing had been done by the French to keep the Irish under their control nearly 20 years before. Costello, however, assured them that there would be no strings attached and no predatory debts. This was partially true. The Prussians were much less obvious than the French in their manipulation, but the weapons certainly weren't free. They were designed to keep Ireland reliant in the long term rather than immediately bankrupting them as the French had attempted to do. Costello, however, was completely oblivious to this. The High Command, though, eventually agreed, and the Irish general public was not informed. As the Dutch crisis was about to explode, the Irish Free Army marched upon Dublin, Wexford, and Belfast, taking all the cities in a bloodless coup. The French army had for the most part withdrawn to the Belgian border, and were in no position to take back the Emerald Isle. After a brazen naval invasion on Wexford was repelled, the French cut their losses and left as quickly as they came, with their belligerent treatment of other nations finally catching up for them. And with this, the Irish Republic was proclaimed with Thomas Costello as its president. He immediately opened up his ports to the Prussians and began requesting economic aid from their new king Wilhelm Friedrich. With the king being only 18, Costello and McKenna believed that they were getting one over on the Prussians. Little did they know, they were once again being trapped. The backbone of local communities, which made the alliance so successful in the first place, was gradually eroded as a new power struggle arose between Costello, Lynch, and McKenna. They would subvert each other at every turn with appointments of rival governors and military officials. Soon, the Free Army began to erode as well, with Costello purposely withholding resources from McKenna, and McKenna making appointments on a political basis in turn. All the while, each faction would ask for large amounts of money from the Prussian benefactors before using it to harass the others. Castello was still the most powerful force, but he used his influence to strike at his political opponents as the situation in Ireland as a whole did not approve. The only region immune from this was Belfast, where miraculously a non-political appointment was made as ex-intelligence officer Edward Callahan was made colonel of the Belfast Army. He ensured that the Protestant North remained part of the Irish Republic, while trying to avoid all the nonsense going on in Dublin. However, in Dublin, corruption and political machinations continued and reached new heights. The only thing each faction had in common was that they were all taking loans from Prussia. When the Prussian Administrative Zone was founded in 1793, Castello quickly joined as he sought to use the Prussians' influence to defeat his rivals. As the years passed, it became clear that nothing had changed. The Irish people remained poor, with Ireland remaining an agricultural economy where the average farmer had no possibility of improvement or change. Some regions of the nation didn't even know the Irish Republic was proclaimed. It was all just more of the same. Castello came up with a new economic policy for Ireland. He established the Irish pound, which is based on falsifying gold reserves and using foreign investors' money to show profits to entice new investors. When this wasn't enough, loans from the Prussians were taken, like always. The Irish Republic was once again selling out their people to foreign rule, all to protect the interests of the rulers in Dublin. This was quite literally exemplified with the leasing of Wexford port to Prussia, which was motivated in part for desire of money and also a way for Castello to undermine Lynch's influence. Castello at this point cared more about sidelining his enemies than improving the nation, all the while boasting in public about his achievements of overthrowing the French. A sad state for people who struggled so much. Ignorance became a tool of the regime, keeping the political scheming in the capital away from the public's ears to maintain a false sense of stability. Gradually, education was not only lacking but actively opposed, with Castello seen as a threat to his support base of the rural poor. It seemed as if all the effort, Ireland's leaders had just stumbled back into foreign rule and humiliation. All the while, the people were kept purposely ignorant to stop any change before it could threaten the Republican leaders in Dublin. Change was a dirty word, and Castello and his crew made it absolutely sure of it. The revolutionary republicanism was gradually replaced with a bizarre conservatism based around Irish nationalism. You need not seek a better future for yourself, simply a better future for the nation. It seemed as if Ireland's hope was fading, decades of fighting all seemingly for naught. Still, people carried on their normal lives, unloading crates as the Prussian ships arrived in Wexford Bay. Cold cynicism set in, as the Battle of Irish paved on like always. It wasn't clear what was ahead, but to most it seemed like more of the same was the only thing on the horizon. One can only hope that eventually, things will for once truly change.